Hello, everyone. We're meeting today after another painful night, a broken ceasefire and more innocent Israelis murdered. A lot of questions. In moments like this, clarity matters, which is why we are so fortunate to have with us our guest who really needs no introduction for anyone who follows the IDF. A voice of clarity and conviction, British Colonel Richard Kemp is joining us from Israel. He's, of course, a decorated war hero who led troops in Iraq and Afghanistan during the Second Gulf War. His relationship with the IDF spans over 2.5 decades, where he's worked closely with them. He's been on the ground in Gaza, in Lebanon, and alongside Israeli soldiers in some of the most intense combat zones. He's testified at the UN and other international bodies, standing up for the truth about the IDF's ethics and restraint, even when it's inconvenient. Colonel Kemp, it's an honor to have you with us.
It's my pleasure, and it's always a pleasure and an honor to do anything with FIDF. It's such a fantastic organization that does so much extremely valuable work to support our IDF soldiers.
Thank you so much for saying that. You have such an incredible perspective. And so from someone who truly knows, can you share with us, could you ever have imagined the speed, the success, the coordination amongst Israeli security forces that we saw first in Lebanon and now in Iran? Can you just elaborate on what the world just witnessed here?
Yeah, I think and we've seen some phenomenal events taking place over the last 20 months, whatever it is, including, of course, the beepers in Lebanon, the elimination of key leaders of Hezbollah and also of Hamas, and those have been in many cases absolutely breathtaking operations. But I think so far nothing really has equaled what we've seen in Iran, dealt by the IDF and Mossad as well, in the last 11, 12 days. It's absolutely staggering, and I think the results, which I'm sure everybody here has been following closely, the results speak for themselves, but they are the consequence of a long period, years of preparation, of rehearsal, of practicing at carrying out attacks by the Israeli Air Force, of coordination, and of interoperability between the different components of the IDF. And I think probably above all, it's an extraordinary story of intelligence. I don't think any other intelligence agency in the world would be able to achieve the level of penetration that the IDF or the IDF and Mossad and other intelligence services have achieved against Iran. It's phenomenal. And you just have to think back 11, 12 days to the opening strikes, which included the elimination of large numbers of IRGC and military commanders at the top levels, as well as nuclear scientists. That was a huge blow, and that essentially set the scene for what followed, because taking out many of the top commanders would have really sent the armed forces of Iran into a spiral. There's no way they could have been ready to operate normally, having had that. And one other thing I think worth mentioning on that subject is the isolation it placed Ayatollah Khomeini in. He's had all of his top advisors taken out of the game at the start, and he's apparently left isolated, bewildered, probably unable to really think logically or coherently. He's already a very old man anyway. So I think, I don't think any other armed forces or intelligence services could achieve this phenomenal success against Iran right from the beginning, continuing right up to this morning.
Wow. I think that one of the things that that a lot of people have questions around are just how far did the success go? There's a question about how much were Iran's capabilities diminished? There were reports, or Iran at least was projecting, that it was able to move some of its nuclear material, and therefore is the job done? There was this insertion of a ceasefire, but was the job done? So can you speak to what Iran's capabilities are at this time? Like what do we know for sure?
Don't know very much for sure. We know a certain amount from what briefings have come out from the IDF, which we can obviously rely upon. But we don't, they don't, even they, I don't think yet know exactly how much damage they've done. And if we take, first of all, the primary objective of this operation, which was to get rid of Iran's nuclear capability, my estimate is that has been largely successful. Israel has been striking at Iranian nuclear facilities since the start of this campaign. And of course, the United States delivered the coup de grace with an attack by B-2 bombers and submarine-launched cruise missiles against 3 of the nuclear sites a couple of days back. I think we can assume that with something like 12 bunker buster bombers delivered into Fordo, the most important of the sites, that site and its centrifuges within underground would have been largely destroyed. The same, I think, applies to the other sites that were hit by Israel and one by the US as well. So I think we can assume that most of Iran's nuclear capability has been taken out. There are these rumors that you mentioned of some uranium, highly enriched uranium, being moved out of Fordo just before the US strikes. I don't know whether that's true or not. It may be, it may not be. Iran, obviously, it's in Iran's interest to say that they did that, both in order to bolster up their flagging credibility within Iran itself, to show that they have defeated the Zionist entity by taking out the nuclear material. And also, if the Western world believes that, it gives Iran another bargaining chip. But we don't know. It's simply impossible to say. Also, it's possible they have other centrifuge sites that Israel didn't know about. I think it's probably unlikely, but it is a possibility. And if that's the case, then they could have the capability of, if they've got that uranium out, of further enriching it to weapons-grade state. So it's not necessarily, as far as we're aware now, the end of the Iranian nuclear program. It's certainly been done enormous damage. As far as the ballistic missiles capability is concerned, which was one of the other major targets for Israel. Again, Israel has done immense damage to that. I think the estimate is they've taken out something like 60% plus of ballistic missile launchers. And if you haven't got the launchers, you can't launch the missiles, so they're pretty much a waste of time. And that's hugely damaging. We should think also about what effect those ballistic missiles have had. They've been fired relentlessly at Israel pretty much every night and sometimes during the day for the last 11, 12 days. And like most people here in Israel, I've been given many early alarm calls to go to the shelters when those missiles have been fired. Their effect has been absolutely minimal. And I don't say that lightly. I'm well aware that I think it's now 28 Israelis have been killed as a result of the ballistic missiles fired. Of course, every single one of those lives is a tragedy. But something like 90% of all ballistic missiles fired by Iran into Israel have been intercepted. And they've been intercepted by both Israeli pilots in the skies before they enter Israel airspace. They've been intercepted by Israeli anti-missile systems on the ground. And I think quite crucially as well by US, particularly the US THAAD anti-missile system in Israel, manned by US soldiers, supporting Israel and helping in that effort. And that's actually quite a phenomenal success rate, something comparable to the Iron Dome's success rate against missiles fired from Gaza and from Lebanon and other places. On top of that, they've attempted to fire, I'm not sure 100%, I think it's something like 1,000 drones into Israel since the war began. With about 3 exceptions, they've all been taken down, and none of those drones has really had an impact. So overall, this has shown the weakness of Iran, no matter how much they might brag. But the reality is that they've achieved no strategic effect on Israel. And although the casualties are tragic, they're far fewer than I think the IDF were expecting during this conflict. So they have no cards left to play. Their nuclear, whatever nuclear capability they now have, it cannot, in my view, cannot be resurrected into anything approaching the status it was at before this campaign began. And their ballistic missile armory is highly diminished. So what other cards do they have to play? They've talked about closing the Strait of Hormuz. I think they're fearful of doing that because of the effect it would have, particularly on their Chinese allies. They've spoken about devastating attacks against the US in the region. They tried that this morning or last night with minimal success. That was actually a token effort, and they were so afraid, I think, of the US response to it that they warned the US they were going to do it in advance, and they warned Qatar as well. So I think, you know, that really kind of sums up the current situation as it stands today.
It's been incredible to see how the IDF and its allies have defended against this genocidal attack. Like, when we see the impact of one missile that gets through, we understand the catastrophe if more had gotten through. And we're just so appreciative for our heroes, our soldiers, and all the incredible work that they're doing. When you talk about the cards that Iran has left, I'd love to hear your opinion about the flex that they've said that they have their allies in Russia, for instance, who are ready to transfer nuclear weapons to them. Do you think that's just them saving face, or do you think there's any truth to those kinds of comments?
I mean, Russia and China as well.
Yes,
will do pretty much anything to damage the United States and its allies. They will, you know, that's their primary goal in most of the things they do outside of their specific fights they've got in their own regions. They want to oppose the US at every turn. But I suspect, and obviously no one knows this, but I suspect that neither Russia nor China would provide nuclear material to Iran. They might say they will. Iran might say that they will. But I very much doubt it. I don't think either Russia or China wanted a nuclear armed Iran in the first place. They were, of course, party to the flawed Obama nuclear deal. Russia, anyway, was, and I think the prospects of that are pretty minimal. It's obviously a possibility, but I think it's unlikely.
What does it mean? Can you explain to us what does it tell us that, for instance, when Iran asked Hezbollah to jump into the war and they didn't, what does that communicate? What does that tell us? And the different shifting of regional alliances that Israel was, you know, able to use the airspace over Arab countries. Like, can you explain to us what the consequence of these incredible actions are long term for the idea?
Yeah, I mean, Iran had every intention of strangling Israel when it effectively launched the 7th of October war, using its proxies, of course. And the idea was to destroy Israel, to get rid of Israel. The opposite has been the effect. Israel has become far more strengthened as a result of this conflict, tragic though the conflict is, but it has strengthened Israel. And it's severely weakened Iran. And you take Hezbollah, which you mentioned, in Lebanon. Hezbollah is a creation of Iran and a proxy of Iran. And Hezbollah was supplied with tens and tens of thousands of missiles in Lebanon aimed at Israel. The sole purpose of those missiles was for today, was for what's happened over the last 12 days, was to, first of all, deter Israel from attacking Iran. And if it failed to do that, then by retaliating against Israel with all its might. Now, not a single missile has been fired out of Lebanon by Hezbollah, as far as I know, since this conflict began, not one. So it's failed, utterly failed. And the reason it's failed is because Israel took it to pieces. Last year, Israel essentially decapitated Hezbollah, did huge damage from the air and on the ground to Hezbollah's military capability. And Hezbollah is now shaking in its boots. It daren't. Despite Iran's pleas to Hezbollah to open fire, it didn't do so, and it's afraid that if it did, it would be finally finished off by Israel. And there's also been pressure, unusual, I think unprecedented pressure since Hezbollah came into existence, from the Lebanese government against Hezbollah. And the Lebanese army has actually been acting against Hezbollah for the first time. So they're in dire straits, and they can't really, it's very hard to see how they can recover, certainly not in the short term. The primary axis for supplying weapons and munitions, etc., to Hezbollah came through Syria from Iran. And Iran, of course, now has lost Syria. And it lost Syria as a direct consequence of Israel's attacks on Hezbollah and its attacks on Hamas. And no one was able to save Assad, despite the fact that, of course, Iran wanted to. And so that's been a regional game changer. I'm not saying everything's going to be sweet and dandy or fine and dandy, whatever the American expression is, in Syria, but it's certainly changed that situation. As far as the Houthis are concerned, another Iranian proxy, they've made some feeble attempts to attack Israel since this war began. They've obviously had some fairly significant effects against shipping in the Red Sea as well, but they've been pretty much marginalized. They've taken a hammering from Israel in recent weeks, particularly. Yeah, they're still there. They may fire the odd drone or missile, or try to, and they may again possibly attempt to interdict shipping in the Red Sea. But I think they're not really a game changer as far as I'm concerned. The Iranian proxies in Iraq, they made a few feeble attempts at attacking Israel without any great success, without any success. So, again, what have they proven? Hamas is on the verge of complete destruction, I think, by Israel. I hope it happens soon. Another proxy not available to Iran. And their proxies within Judea and Samaria, they're obviously working hard, or have been working hard to try and build that up, but they have also been, to a large extent, ineffective due to significant Israeli military action in Judea and Samaria. So in summary, the whole proxy network that I believe Iran spent something like $500 billion on building is pretty much finished. Now, of course, assuming this Iran remains on its feet, this regime remains on its feet in Iran, then it might try and rebuild them, but it's got some significant lessons to learn about its failure in that proxy network.
That's a perfect segue. So there has been so much talk about the aims of the war. The term "rising lion" was also a reference to the Iranian flag prior to the Ayatollah taking power. And so what are your thoughts around regime change? The United States has said that it's not one of their aims for this war. There have been calls for the Iranian people to rise up and to carpe diem. What are your thoughts about the prospects for that at this point?
I think neither the US nor Israel stated regime change as a goal of their conflict. But of course, as you alluded to, the Prime Minister here certainly called on Iranian citizens to rid themselves of the regime. And I think that would have been, and could well be a very consequential byproduct of what Israel and the US have done to Iran. There are a lot of opposition groups in Iran. The regime is extremely unpopular. It murders, rapes, tortures, disappears, imprisons, and impoverishes Iranian citizens. And they frankly have had enough of it, more than enough of it. And they've now seen the utter weakness of the regime. And some of Israel's strikes have, I think, been directly aimed at, for example, at the Basij, which is the kind of the SS of Iran, or maybe the IRGC is the SS of Iran. They both are probably different branches, which is supposed to control the people, and the IRGC itself, which is supposed to control the people. They've been badly damaged. And this may give Iranian people the opportunity to rise up. What's not clear, and I don't think anyone really can answer this question, is how well organized or how strong or how emboldened they might be to rise up against their regime. But it's a possibility. And another possibility is that the army, which is not particularly enthusiastic about the Islamic regime in Iran, the army might take over possibly, or the IRGC might take over itself. That wouldn't change very much if the IRGC did. If the army did, it might lead to a different situation. But I think the goal is basically open now for some entity or entities to to bring down the Ayatollahs. And it probably couldn't have happened until right now, because while the war was going on, people probably weren't able to gather, organize. They were under attack. Not civilians weren't being directly attacked themselves, but they were, obviously, were to an extent, I think, paralyzed by what was going on. And there's also, I think, an element probably among the Iranian people of saying we don't want Israel to be our direct saviors. And therefore they would have been probably not inclined to rise up during the conflict. But now we've got this ceasefire, however long it lasts. This might now be the time in the coming days, weeks or months, might be the time for the regime to be overthrown. And it would be a very good thing if it was, because I think the greatest danger now, if the nuclear capability has not been completely erased, is that this regime does seek to bring it back. A successor regime might see that it might want nuclear weapons, but it might see the consequences of what happened to the previous nuclear weapon program as being too dangerous to attempt to resurrect it.
Do you feel that it's truly possible to cut off the head of the snake without regime change?
I think if this regime remains in place, the danger will remain in place. The Ayatollahs will obviously wish to be seen to be strong, not to be badly affected by what happened. They will want to return to their business as usual, including in the nuclear program. So I don't think, as long as this regime remains in place, the danger has not gone. The head of the octopus has not been completely removed. It's been given a few black eyes, but not completely taken off. And I think that's, obviously, and while that continues, while that situation continues, obviously Israel's going to have to continue to keep a very close eye on developments there, and take action when necessary, if necessary. But I think in my estimation, the likelihood is that the regime, if it continues, they will have learned some lessons from this. They may not publicly admit it, but they will have learned lessons. I suspect they will not attempt to return at speed to their nuclear program. If anything, they're probably going to want to play out the presidency of Donald Trump and the prime ministership of Benjamin Netanyahu, because they've seen what that combination can do and will do again if it becomes necessary. So they may well want to wait a few years and hope that what they would consider more reasonable people, in other words, people who are more likely to appease them, return to the White House and to the Prime Minister's office here.
On that note, can we speak about last night? What do you see in light of the ceasefire, the broken ceasefire, Israel's being told to sort of stand down, not retaliate, or only in, sort of for optics, but not a true retaliation? What do you make of what's ahead, given all of those events over the last 12 hours?
Yeah, I think on the Iran side, they had no choice but to go for a ceasefire. They're on the ropes. They've got no cards to play, as I said before. And what they want is an end to this conflict. And so they were obviously happy to do so. On the Israeli side, Prime Minister Netanyahu made a statement after the ceasefire was announced, saying that Israel has achieved all of its objectives in Iran and more, which indicates that he is happy also for the ceasefire to take place. I think the people in Israel, and one thing that anyone who's been in Israel or is in Israel now who's watching this will agree with, I think anyway, is that there's been an unprecedented level of unity among the Israeli people, including political opposition leaders, for what the Prime Minister has done, for the impact he's had. But of course, it comes at a price. People have been in their bomb shelters several times a night and often during the day as well. Schools have been closed. Businesses have suffered a lot, hugely, particularly in the cities. So it's not something that can go on forever. I think the Israeli people would probably continue to support it if it did. But if the Prime Minister's right that his objectives have been achieved, then it sort of makes sense. you could go on battering Iran, but to what real end? So that's I think I'm not saying that the ceasefire will hold either. I think it's every possibility that Iran could breach it, although maybe that's less likely now given the hammering they've taken. But they could happen. We'll have to see how that unfolds. As far as the President Trump's instructions to Israel not to retaliate or to only retaliate in a token way, I think that was I wouldn't think that was well received by the Israeli population and possibly by the government as well. But I don't think it represents a significant rift. I know that today Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump have had a phone call to discuss this. And I would expect, we can't read President Trump's, at least I can't read President Trump's mind, and I'm sure few people can. But I don't see this as being a division between Israel and the United States now. I think relations will be back on an even keel, probably are already.
In light of what we've seen, and really the reminder that negotiating with terrorists is, we can't trust what they say. They could say one thing and do completely the opposite, as we saw just last night. What do you think of the threat of sleeper cells in the United States? That was one of the threats that Iran had made, was that it would activate its sleeper cells. Do you feel that that's a legitimate threat, that Americans need to be on guard for that, despite ceasefires and public comments?
Yeah, I do think that. I know, going back for many years when I used to work in British intelligence, I know that the IRGC and Hezbollah had sleeper cells across Europe and in the United States and other countries, again, intended primarily for exactly this situation. They were supposed to be activated if Israel or the United States attacked Iran, and they haven't been, as far as we know, or if they have been, they've been shut down by our own security services. But from what I can see, they haven't even attempted it, which may have happened because the IRGC has been in such disarray, and Hezbollah has been in such disarray as well. So they may have not had the coordination to activate those cells, but they're still there, and it's still a possibility. From my knowledge and experience of them, these are not hugely, shall we say, effective organizations. They can do a certain amount of damage, and of course, just one death would be terrible. But I don't think they're an entity that we need to be overly concerned about. Obviously, we should be aware of them, and I've no doubt whatever our security services are well aware of them and monitoring their activities as closely as they possibly can. It could be that given what I said about the proxies and the effective neutralization of most of them, it could be the only tool Iran has now at the right time and place to carry out some form of strike back, and it may be that they will try that.
We've dedicated the majority of this conversation to Iran, and it's understandable why. But I do want to turn our attention to Gaza for a minute while we have you. Can you share with us what you have seen there, what our soldiers have been up against there, and what you see as the forecast for getting our hostages back and for the ending of that part of the conflict?
Yeah, I've been into Gaza numerous times since the conflict began with the IDF, and I've observed their actions there. And I think, we should all be incredibly proud of the extremely dangerous but very effective work the IDF has done against Hamas and the other terrorist entities inside Gaza. And they're continuing to do that. While the attention of the world has been on Iran, they haven't let up. They've been actively operating against Hamas. And obviously to try and destroy Hamas as a viable entity, but also critically to get the hostages back. And as people will have seen, some hostage bodies, unfortunately, have been returned in recent days. But they're still hard at work trying to do that. And I think the whole thing has taken a long time for a number of reasons. One, because it's an extremely challenging battlefield, the most complex battlefield any army has ever had to fight on in the history of warfare. Secondly, they've had the hostages to try and keep safe and to try and rescue, and that has delayed things enormously. And thirdly, under the previous US administration, they tried to put the brakes on the IDF's offensive against Hamas. But I think now, obviously, I would guess that what's happened to the Iranian regime will have had some effect on morale among Hamas fighters, and that might determine how much longer they want to fight. But I just want to share with you an experience I had a few days ago in Gaza. I went into Gaza with an organization called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is essentially an American enterprise made up mainly of ex-US service people and armed, whose objective is to securely deliver aid to the people of Gaza. And that's been necessary because most of the aid that's gone into Gaza up until now has been hijacked by Hamas, has been taken over by Hamas, has been used by Hamas to control the civilian population, and has been sold by Hamas to raise funds for its own terrorist activities. And that obviously is highly unsatisfactory. And that, of course, includes all of the UN aid that's gone into Gaza and pretty much all of the other aid agencies. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation does it differently. They have 4 compounds in Gaza secured by the GHF. They deliver aid to those places, and then they allow people to come into those places and collect the aid. And I was there for about 3-4 hours a few days back, and during 2 hours of that period, around 20,000 Gazans came in to collect aid and went away with particularly, mainly with food, but mainly commodities like flour, sugar, and cooking oil, and other things as well. And I spoke to a lot. I must have spoken to about 50 Gazans during the time they were collecting aid. And there are a few significant points that came from that. First of all, they were extremely grateful for that aid. In many cases, the first time they'd ever received free aid during this war. Most of it had been sold via Hamas to them. Many of them were saying, "I love America," because they associate this aid delivery with the United States. "I love Trump" was another refrain that I heard many, many times. I also heard, "I hate Hamas, kill Hamas." And when that was said by individuals, the people around them were cheering. They hate Hamas. They hold Hamas responsible for what's happened to them. They also, of course, wrongly, but nevertheless, hold Israel responsible for what's happened to them. But I got the impression that they put the blame more strongly on the shoulders of Hamas. Almost all of them that I spoke to said they want to get out of Gaza as quickly as possible. They see no future staying in Gaza. I saw no starving Gazans. Most of the ones I saw were fit, healthy, cheerful, and cheerful probably because they were getting their hands on some free aid. But there was no sign of emaciation or anything like that. Obviously, I didn't see the whole of Gaza, and there could well be cases around Gaza, but the people I saw were far from had any appearance whatsoever of starving. And I think that the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation could be a game changer in this because it does help to wrest control from Hamas. And incidentally, the 2 primary enemies of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation are Hamas. They've killed a number of, I think, 8 local Gazans who have been working for the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. They've threatened, many Gazans told me that they've been threatened by Hamas not to collect aid from the GHF. So they see it as a real threat. They hate it. And they also, the other real opponents of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, believe it or not, is the United Nations and the other more established aid organizations. They've opposed it tooth and nail since the start. And you've got to really ask the question why it's Hamas and the UN that oppose this extremely effective and very sensible means of getting aid to the people in Gaza. Incidentally, I took some video footage and some photographs while I was inside this space in Gaza, which I posted on my Twitter account and Instagram account. So if you want to look at my Twitter, this is not an advert for my Twitter account, but if you want to see some of the pictures, it's at COL Richard Kemp on Twitter, and you can find it there.
Wow, fascinating to hear your experience on the ground and what the civilians are actually saying, because of course those voices never make it to the mainstream media or anywhere. They're silenced and they're punished if they attempt to. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. You mentioned the UN, and it is something that I wanted to ask you about. Of course, you've spoken at the UN brilliantly. And I wanted to ask, now that there have been so many world leaders and decision makers, thought leaders who have acknowledged the work that Israel has done to save the West, to save the world, and even with the IAEA finally admitting that Iran had violated its uranium enrichment, do you think that there's any chance of people giving Israel the credit it deserves in making the world a safer place? Or do you see this as for understanding what was just achieved? Or do you think that this is just going to pass in the news cycle?
Unfortunately, I think the latter. I think while many world leaders I exclude the UN as well. The UN have been highly critical of Israel's actions and the US actions against Iran. And many world leaders have kind of timidly acknowledged that Israel and the US have been doing the right thing about Iran, while at the same time demanding de-escalation and negotiations and all the other things that have failed so badly over many years. I think, unfortunately, they're not going to now give credit to Israel. I think Israel, it will still be seen as being the pariah, and that's of course as a result of a very, very long anti-Israel political warfare campaign, which has put a huge number of people around the world in this position. I would add, though, that most of our leaders, particularly in Western Europe, are very timid people who should have been right behind Israel on this. They should have. Britain, for example, it shouldn't just have been saying, "Yeah, well, we acknowledge that we don't want nuclear weapons in Iran, but we call on Israel to de-escalate." They should have actually sent British combat planes into action in support of Israel, either defending Israel or attacking the Iranian regime with Israel. That's what they should have done. They're far too timid to do that, even though they do recognize, I think they recognize, that a nuclear-armed Iran is a threat to them just as much as it's a threat to Israel and the other countries in the Middle East. But they lack the courage, and there is that, one thing behind the scenes, not so much behind the scenes, that is on the minds of all our political leaders and will remain there after this, and accounts for some of their attitude towards Israel, is their own electorates. They have, I think it might have been Henry Kissinger that said, many countries don't have foreign policy, they just have domestic policy. And I think, for example, in Britain, Keir Starmer, our Prime Minister's foreign policy is based entirely on domestic policy. And of course, he knows that there are huge numbers of people in the UK, particularly supporters of his party, who voted for him and he hoped to vote for him again, who hate Israel. And he has to bear that in mind. It's domestic politics that's driving this. Just last weekend, we saw on the streets of London, mobs, huge mobs on the streets, anti-Israel mobs, pro-Hamas mobs, are also holding up placards with Ayatollah Khomeini's face on them. And that shows you where many of these people's loyalty lies. The reality, though, and this is important for our parliament, for our government, because the government, the Labour Party, depends very, very heavily on many of these people to vote for them. But I don't think in any way they reflect the majority opinion in the UK. I think the majority opinion in the UK is in support of Israel. The difficulty is that the reasonable, logical people who understand the truth and want to pursue genuine peace, as opposed to turning on their own country, they tend to be quiet, unlike the mobs that go on the streets who oppose Israel and oppose Britain as well. So I think with that dynamic, unless something could be done to rouse the reasonable people, which I'm not sure how likely that is, then I'm afraid we're going to see a continuation of the attitudes we've seen to Israel over the course of this conflict, and of course for many years before. But having said that, I'm also very optimistic about the future of Israel. I know it's easy to be depressed about what's been happening for the last 20 months or so. But I think Israel's going to emerge from this conflict far more strongly than it went into it. It's had generations of Israelis, old and young, who have made sacrifices on the battlefield, on the home front, fighting for their country. And though tragic this war is, the unity that brings to a country and the strength that brings to a country is borne out in history. Secondly, I think Israel now knows who it can rely on and who it can't, who its friends and who its enemies are, and therefore will become far more resilient and self-reliant, particularly in terms of weaponry. They don't need another person in the White House to suddenly say we're suspending supply of this or that weapon. So they'll be more self-reliant, I think. Thirdly, I think the diaspora in many different countries, which, I think there was an element of complacency among the Jewish diaspora, who I dealt with a lot of the time over the years before this conflict began, before the 7th of October. And I think they will have woken up now more. I hope so anyway. And the strength of the diaspora, particularly in the US, is really so important for Israel. And finally, I would say that pretty much every Arab country in the region has been behind Israel on this war. They may have said something different publicly. The dynamics of Middle Eastern politics dictate that. But the reality is almost all countries, Arab countries, have been right behind Israel. They want Hamas smashed. They want Iran smashed. And Israel has shown itself to be incredibly strong, to be a defender not only of Israel, but a defender also of their allies in the Middle East against the threat of Iran, which was as much an enemy of Saudi Arabia, for example, as it was of Israel. And a consequence of that, I think, is we're going to see an extension of the Abraham Accords to include Saudi Arabia in some way and other Arab countries. And so I think, obviously none of us can foresee the future, but I'm very strongly of the view that Israel is going to emerge from this far more strongly than it went into it.
Amazing. Amen. Wow. That was an incredible encapsulation, and I really hope that you're right on every point. My final question, and you alluded to it a moment ago, but I just wanted to ask you, it seems that it was easier, quote unquote, to take down Iran than it has been to de-radicalize some Westerners. Some of the attitudes that we've seen in Canada, in Europe, in America have been shocking. Everyone has definitely shown who they are, their intelligence, their degree of brainwashing. We have seen, everybody is showing who they are right now. I wanted to ask you, what do you see as the long-term consequence of that? It seems that there are, all the younger generations are very deliberately being brainwashed and taught to hate Israel. What do you see as an approach to the radicalization that we're seeing really around the world and in Western countries who need to be saving themselves?
Well, I'm speaking more now about Western Europe than Canada or the US, but many Western European countries are now in a state of somewhat fear. And it's not so much because of the Middle East, but it's because of what's been going on in Ukraine. And most governments have said they're going to increase defense spending, increase their military capability, because they see a threat, particularly from Russia, particularly against Eastern European countries, but obviously being NATO members, it's a threat against themselves as well. So they're all talking big about building up their armed forces. We'll see whether that materializes or not. But an important thing, an important aspect of both military deterrence and military effectiveness is political will. We haven't seen that at any stage during either the war here in the Middle East or indeed the war in Ukraine, which has been going on for over 3 years now. And the political will is lacking. And another factor that, and that's even to defend themselves, never mind to support an ally like Israel that's under attack. And another factor, which really more in answer to your question, is the ordinary people, particularly the young people who are, if there is a need for a fight, they're going to have to be called on to fight. And how likely that is that the people are going to rally to the flag when the time comes. And in order for that to be more assured, there needs to be a significant change in, and I'm talking mainly about Britain now, but it applies to other European countries, in the educational system, both high school and university system, which has played major parts in radicalizing and brainwashing the young people who know no better, and they follow what the hard left educational staff tell them. And it's not just against Israel, it's also against our own country, as I alluded to before. When I was at school, which is a huge number of years ago, far well before most of your viewers were born, I was taught to hate Britain. I was taught we were a colonial country, colonial past, we had this terrible, evil empire, and we should hate ourselves. Now, if children are brought up with that kind of thinking, and it's obviously intensified significantly since then, what hope is this? So that would have to be, I think, just for our own defense, that would have to be revisited. But just one word of optimism on this, and I don't know how useful it is, but I'll say it anyway. Ireland is one of the most virulently anti-Israel countries in Europe, probably the worst country that's an enemy of Israel in Europe. And there's a historical reason for that, which I won't go into now, but it is the case. You might say, well, Ireland, what's Ireland? It's the size of, I don't know, it's the tip of the Florida Panhandle or something like that. But I think, you know, they're also a bit of a barometer. And I don't know if any of your viewers have heard of the Eurovision Song Contest. Is that something you know? Yeah, okay. So there's a thing called the Eurovision Song Contest, which I've never watched in my life. But effectively, the voting in the Eurovision Song Contest is not based on musical talent. It's based on political influence and based on what people think about a particular country rather than the singers that are singing for it. And interestingly, in Ireland, the overwhelming majority voted for Israel in the last Eurovision Song Contest. The elite judges, of course, representing Ireland did not, but there is two separate votes, and the majority of the voting went to Israel. And when you bear in mind that the majority of voters in that song contest are under 25, I think between 14 or something and 25, that tells quite a story. It's totally different to what polling tells you, and it's totally different to what the actions of the government tell you. But maybe that gives some kind of glimmer of hope for young people in Ireland and by extension in other parts of Western Europe for the future.
Thank you so much for that insight and for that optimism and for all of the insights that you've given us today. We truly hope your voice is amplified, that wherever you go, that it is amplified, that people hear you, hear your clarity and expertise. And we're so honored that you were with us today. Thank you so much, Colonel Kemp. It's an honor.
My great pleasure. Thank you.
Everyone, as we've heard, the threats against Israel continue. Israel's soldiers are doing the work of heroes. They are doing the free world's work in Iran to secure the future of democracy. They are masterfully managing the Israeli population to prevent harm, and they are intercepting attacks in the sky. And sadly, when missiles strike, they are the first to respond. They are risking their lives to pull children, the elderly, and their loved ones out of the rubble to safety. Your support through FIDF equips them with the supplies they need to save lives, the motivation to lift their morale, and the funds to help them recuperate between missions so they can return mission after mission. 100% of your gift right now will go directly to the Homefront Command Search and Rescue Unit, the Manpower Directorate that is caring for the soldiers' well-being, our air defense units, essentially every single Iron Dome and David Sling battery, to our Navy, to Shayetet 3 and Shayetet 13, and to our Air Force. Our soldiers cannot rest, and neither can we. Please consider a gift today at FIDF.org. Our thoughts and prayers are with the people of Israel today and always, and all of those affected. And we pray and hope for more peaceful days ahead. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you again to our incredible guest, Colonel Kemp. See you all next time.